I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are speaking to the author of East Clifton Avenue, a family trilogy, book one, From Sicily to America, 1889 to 1966. It is a captivating novel that intertwines non-fictional events with fictional characters to tell the story of the Buonaforte family and their journey from Sicily to the United States. We will delve into the themes of sacrifice, unconditional love, and the importance of understanding and accepting differences within families. We're delighted to have author Frank Plateroti with us here today on Spotlight, and thank the team at Good River Print and Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Frank, great to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Logan. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. This tells an incredible epic tale of the Buonaforte family, which is basically a fictionalized account of your family, I guess.
Yes, it actually mirrors my mother's family, and a lot of the stories, like Logan. Even your family, every family has a history. Every family has a story. Every family has secrets. Some are revealed, some are taken to the grave, and you're better off with that. But basically, it mirrors my mother's family. She was the seventh of eight children. Of course, the timeline, everybody's gone now.
Hmm.
And I'm my mother's, like I said, the seventh of eight children. I'm the oldest of three boys. Within the story, I am Dean. I'm the narrator of the story, since I know most of the stories and most of the history of the family, because I had an interest when I was younger. So I'd go around and ask, and the family, like your family, like many, would talk about the history, would talk about the stories, would talk about the parents, especially when one parent passed away. And there's a lot of, bittersweet remembrances. Okay. And the other factor was that, which is in the book, when with the Buonaforte, Enzo Buonaforte dies, which was my grandfather.
Mhm.
Okay. What do you do now? Which is one of the dilemmas that people still have. Now, what do you do when you have an elderly parent and they were dependent on their spouse? Now, what do you do? What do the children do? Okay. So circumstance, they ended up living with me, with my parents, and she stayed. Of course, I was 12 years old at the time. We didn't make another bedroom, so she stayed in my room with twin beds. So what did I basically do? I mean, I took care of her. She was a heavy-set woman, had eight children, arthritis in the knees. And to me, it was a normal thing to do. It's like, I wasn't a hero. It's just that's what families did. They took in their grandparents, and I loved my grandmother. So a lot of time I would ask her about the stories. And, there's a phenomenon, Logan, which I'm much older than you, and which I've experienced, is that I may not remember, I have to think about what I had for dinner last night. But as I get older, the remembrance and the things I remember they come more to fruition as you get older. So I went back when I started writing this book. It was bittersweet because I had to go back and put myself in those times and then write down the stories. Okay. So,
and also, I notice you begin your book with the death of your parents. And
yes,
that is such a, event that makes us stop and think about our lives and take stock, because we realize our journey's not forever. Even if we
no,
deluded ourselves with a young man's dreams
no.
that we'd live forever, now we realize my dad died, my mom died, I'm going to die. And what we did here matters. And I guess that kind of inspired you to start doing this work.
Well, the couple things too is that I both had wonderful parents. I had strong mother, a strong father, and that really, they molded me, as I wrote in the book. It molded me to who I am. And when my father passed away at 54, I was 29, and then here I am, helping my mother and everything, and then taking care of her, which again was no big deal. Very close to her, very close to my children. But then when she passed away, then it's like you're an orphan. Okay. And then I'm left with all the memorabilia. And I had in her, she had a townhouse, and in the townhouse, she had a cage, and there was something called it's a marriage chest, a hope chest, filled with pictures, filled with memorabilia. And as I taught 20 years communication at local university, and I always told my children is that we own nothing. Everything we have is borrowed. It just goes on to something else. And what happens is, after a while, what we're forgotten. And what took that home to me is there's many, many pictures and memorabilia my mother had. Is I don't know who these people are. They're going to end up to my kids and end up in the trash. So I wanted to have this as a legacy of my parents. It's sacrifices my parents made, sacrifices my mother made, as millions of other children do, my age, whatever. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to write it in a book. I wanted to revisit them. And, a lot of it was bittersweet. Some of it brought me to tears because I remembered things I hadn't remembered in years. Okay. And so that's what I began writing. And then talking to my cousins who were around and sharing with them and saying, yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. And that's basically how I got started. And also, my philosophies of life, which I was able to write down in there. And then I extended that to another book. And that's basically what I did. I have a legacy now for my children and their children to read and to experience.
It's amazing how far we've come and how much has changed since what you begin in 1866? Is that when your account begins?
Late 1800s, right?
Yeah,
right.
Late 1800s. Here we are, 100 and some odd years later, and so much has changed. When you were growing up, I presume in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the idea of making the sacrifice, having your grandma stay in your room was just natural. This is what your mother and father said you were going to do.
That's right. That's what you do.
You're going to do it. Today it'd be child abuse.
Right. But
I know, but it's just what we did. My mother rented out rooms in her house. We had an old lady living in one room and an old man living in a couple downstairs. And, just what people did to get by, particularly if you were the child of an immigrant.
Right. The other thing, Logan, which I think is one of the things that also want to come out of the book, is the fact that we don't have an appreciation of older people, of elderly people. I mean, they are a treasure trove of, as I enter those, I just turned 72 last week. And as I enter these years, you never know. I never take anything for granted. But, there has to be more respect for older people. And what's interesting? I think technology helped with this, because now you have 23andMe, you have these services that will tell you about your history, and people love it. And what I've heard from people who've read the book, two things they related to. Number one, they said, damn it, I should have paid more attention when I was growing up to my family history. I hardly know anything. I can't pass anything on to my children. Okay. And the other thing is that they do have this interest in their history, and they don't have anywhere to go for it anymore. So, and that's why I think it inspires people, younger people now, to say, hey, mom and dad, how did you get here? And I even ask people, I used to ask my students, I was very concerned about having them have an appreciation for the ethnicity. And go talk to your parents. You're Italian, but from what city, what region? They don't know. I said, go ask them, come back to me, and we'll discuss and talk about it a little bit, so you have some appreciation.
Right. Well, part of what's missing today is conversations. I mean, we would sit around the dinner table on a Sunday afternoon and talk. Remember what Uncle Leo did, and when he had to swim out to the White House, and he rescued that dog that was, these lore that was passed down from generation to generation about what our great uncles did, our uncles did. This guy was 6'6" and built. All of that seems to have gone away today because we're so only focused on the nuclear family.
And you know what else, Logan? Something, again, going back, a word my mother taught me, and she would always hit on this. You got to learn to appreciate. You've got to learn to, if you can't appreciate it, you can't enjoy your life. Because she was born in 1925. So she was a Depression baby, but she never forgot it. Okay, she never forgot it. And I tell my kids, stories like my grandmother used to slice the Italian bread, and she used to save the crumbs for the chickens.
Yeah,
save everything. And if you spilled olive oil, you got to bless yourself, because that's how valuable it is. Today we take too much for granted. And in the 50s and 60s, it was a boom, but then society changed it, things have changed it, and hopefully we can get back to that. And that is one of the things that I hope people get out of reading the book. Go back to your family, put down the cell phones, turn off the TV, start talking, start writing, start enjoying, and communicate. I taught communication for 20 years. And the thing I saw the most interested my students was their romantic relationships, and they didn't know how to communicate. Okay, they didn't know how to communicate, and until they learned that, which they were learning, then you can have great relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell me about your parents. I mean, they're part of the Buonaforte family, but what year did your parents come to the United States? I'm assuming they were the first generation.
My parents,
tell us a little bit about the immigrant
both my
experience.
parents came from different. My mother was Sicilian, and she was born here in 1925. My father was Galabrese. His parents came from Reggio di Calabria. There's more in the second book that I'm talking about that because they're aristocratic family that were pushed out. And he was brought up in Warren, Pennsylvania. Two different areas, two different kind of families. Okay, my grandmother more on the peasants. My mother's family more on the peasant side, more Southern Italian. Even though my father's parents were Southern Italian, they were more kind of aristocratic, not snobby, aristocratic. My father's mother, she wore, now you're talking 50s, 60s, she wore slacks, blouses, very modern, very contemporary for the time because of her daughter, my aunt. My grandmother, she wore the rolled up stockings, the black shoes, the house dress, the apron, the hairnet, and that was grandma. My mother was more modern. My father was more modern. Okay. I think in the book in the introduction, I write a lot about that. But they were great people. They were really great people. And I also want to stress in that book that again, I go back to my students because that was a great lab. And I said, how many of you can say the word LOVE, love? Some of them hesitate. They can't say love. And I used to exercises for that. You have to, what if your parents were just like taken away by an alien? I don't want to say die. You may never see them again. Don't ever take it for granted. And I never had that with my parents. Every time my father left work, love you, love you, love you. Yeah. And they meant it. It wasn't just, something that they said, to be, but they loved it. And I say it to my children all the time, love you, because you never know what happens. My son passed away 2 years ago. My son was 27. And he passed away in his sleep. He had an aneurysm. But there was never a day that he didn't say, I love you. And I have, he was going on his second master's degree. And there was never a time that, you really take it for granted. I have no regrets. And I never have regrets with my parents. It's just what it is.
Absolutely. Well, that's the beauty. I mean, like I said, a lot of immigrant families are similar, but the Italians tend to be very expressive with their love. They tend to be emotional people. And I know these are probably platitudes I'm not allowed to say, but since they are positive, I will say them. But it's true. I mean, you think of the Italian grandma with the embrace or making gravy on Saturday with meatballs or, whatever your tradition was. It created that sense of love, that sense of home. And it was really nice to carry it on. And it sounds like you're doing the same with your family as well.
Yeah, my daughter is very into that. My daughter is very like me. She's very family. Everybody likes to get together. It's funny that she bought me a T-shirt that says, I'm not yelling, I'm Italian. Because when we get together, everybody's excited, everybody's passionate. I'm not yelling. I'm just excited about this,
Right.
And coming back to that tradition. But I tell you, I do have a suspicion that we're going to come back to that. Yeah. Because the reason I know this, Logan, is because, again, from teaching, a lot of the students that age got sick of texting. They got sick of all the media, the social media. They realized that it was impeding on their privacy. They had to have their own identity, and they were doing it on their own. So I'm very optimistic that things are going to go more toward the family, more toward relationships, because that's all we have. That is all we have. I worked with CEO. I was a television producer before this, and I worked with a lot of high-end people, working with them, but they all have the same. They all have basically all the same. They want to be liked. They some of them don't know how to communicate, and that was basically what my job. How do you make these people communicate? And a lot of times we don't know how to communicate, and we have to learn. We have to take the risk and be vulnerable.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the name Buonaforte. Buonaforte means good strength, I presume, right?
Good strength, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit how you came up with that and why you chose that as a family name.
The real name, my mother's real name was Bonpitro, Good Peter.
Okay.
And when you go back and you trace your family, like my grandfather is in the book, he was brought up by a stepmother. His
Mhm.
father lost his mother shortly after he was born. His mother was she was a mean woman, and he had two younger sisters from her. It's not a Cinderella story because he loved his two sisters, his real two sisters, and but he had to be strong. My grandfather had to be strong, and he had to. He worked which is true in the story. He worked in the food market in Uzumeli, and he couldn't read and he couldn't write, and it inhibited him. And he had to sneak to be taught things. And when his stepmother found out, she stopped it because she wanted him to work. And then finally, he survives. And again, it's a book about survival. Family's about survival. He finally grows up, through different circumstances, gets married. And because of his father was in business with some local mafia people, his father dies, and now there's inheritance. He feels, hey, I've been told that I got to get out of here because someone's going to, they're going to do a hit on me because they don't want to pay the inheritance. Sends the grandmother 6 months ahead, whatever, and then he leaves. So Buonaforte, strong, good, strong, not stepping on people to be strong, good, strong, having honor. And I think sometimes with the Sicilian culture, all you have is that Godfather mentality. But there was a lot of good, and there was a lot of good people. Okay, so the idea of Buonaforte, good, strong survivors, not victims, survivors. And I think that's what most people don't realize. But a lot of parents, I know parents who have handicapped children, they're strong, they're survivors, and they should be celebrated.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny you're talking a little bit about the mafia, and Italians get a bad rap, obviously, because of the mafia. And a lot of Italian friends that I have are angry about it. If you make a joke about, the mafia or something, they don't like it. What do you think about the fact? I don't even know if it's going to change. I mean, every other culture now is protected, but I think you're still allowed to make mob movies and make Italians look like they're thugs and killers and all that.
It's
What's your thought on people like De Niro and Pacino and those types
Logan,
making careers of
Logan,
it all?
it's amazing because you have the mafia, but it's like actually the guy. I think the Valachi papers, yes, because that was true,
Right.
but with The Godfather, I mean, it's one of the best movies that they considered making, but yet it's about criminals. But yet there's honor within the movie. I think it's the romance of the culture.
Mm.
Okay, I think that's what it is, and I think it's there, and I think it will always be there to a certain degree. With technology, it's harder. It's harder to operate because of cameras and things like that.
Mm.
Um, my father was an electrical contractor. He never did anything wrong, but he was very sensitive to that, to the
Mm.
fact that there was always this question and losing contracts because of the fact that people go, oh, I don't know, this, you may be a little, maybe a little suspicious with the Italian
Right.
name, and but then you had people like Sinatra, and you had people like Pacino who really romanced the name that made it more respectable.
Right.
And the other thing is, everybody loves to go to Italy and everybody loves Italian food. So, you want to make a joke about the mafia, be careful. You never know who you're talking to.
Exactly, exactly. And look, Ron DeSantis now, I think, is a top front runner for the presidential nomination for the GOP. So that'll
Mhm.
be a game changer. I mean, we've had an Irish president, we've had a black president. I think it's time for an Italian president, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Get pasta in the White House.
Absolutely. It's healthier than some of that other stuff they
That's
eat.
right. That's right.
One of the themes of your book is unconditional love. Tell the
Yes.
folks at home what this is all about.
Um, Unconditional love is usually from a parent to a child. And I think that parents, I go back and look at, my childhood, and I was a rambunctious kid. I wasn't a bad kid, but I was rambunctious. And
Mhm.
my mother, I used to escape out of my crib, and I used to I want to be on the go all the time. And, the things that I wanted to do, my parents went away with. I wanted to play an instrument. They bought me the instrument. But my mother, no matter what, and my father, they had that unconditional love. They just
Mm.
loved. A good word for it is called agapic love, selfless love. You're worried more about your partner's love, happiness, and love than your own. Now, one of the things, Logan, is, and something that I bring up strongly is you can have 8 children brought up in the same household, okay, under the same parentage, same biology, but they're different. And then is it DNA? Is it nature versus nurture? You know, I could take my mother's family and I can cut it in half. And those are the sisters and siblings that are emotional, affectionate, and emotional but not affectionate.
Right.
And you can do that, and it's amazing. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing what you learn about your family when you really focus your energy and time. It seems like you are like the record keeper of the family. My sister's like that. You ask, you know, well, who did mommy's brother marry? She'll have the whole story. So you kind of found that as your niche, where you kept track of the history of the family.
My mother was the visitor. My mother was the social butterfly. My mother visited all her sisters and brothers and tagged me along because I have 2 younger brothers. One is 5 years younger, one is 7 years younger. Okay. So, but she would tag me, take me along. She'd take me shopping. She'd take me to the market. She wanted that company. She wanted that agapic love. Both my parents were very agapic. So she knew when they talked about this one, talked about that. It wasn't they were gossiping, but they're concerned about these. Well, how is this person? How is Uncle Joe? How is this one? We have cousins in Buffalo. How are they doing? I heard so and so died. You know, typical stuff. Not gossip per se, not judgment. You know, because I again, you know, my philosophy is you don't judge and you don't gossip. Okay, you become an empath. You become empathetic. Well, even if you don't like the person, what if I was in their shoes? Maybe they can't help the way they are. Okay, and now, I have another book, and it's called, all the philosophies that I have that are in East Clifton Avenue are in this book. It's called Speak No Evil. Okay. I don't know if you can see that.
I can. Yep.
And that's basically the culmination of 20 years of communication and communication theories that I developed. Some of them are in the East Clifton Avenue, but then they're explained in the other book. Okay. And basically what that other book is saying that relationships are the most important thing that we have in life, and they should be respected. And you don't judge, you don't gossip. Keep your mouth shut. My mother said, again, going back to my parents, as you're talking about, you don't have anything nice to say, keep your mouth shut. Yeah. Mind your business. Exactly. I have a whole list of things my parents said in Speak No Evil. Every one of them are true today, everyone that I shared. So again, going back to your original question, my mother was the social butterfly. And I heard all the stories. I was interested in everything they had to say. And again, writing everything down, remembering everything.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I had a similar relationship with my mother. I was the youngest of 4 children, and she took me everywhere. And you just absorb things by being held by the hand and taken to the market, taken to the bank, and all that stuff, and learning how they interact. East Clifton Avenue, obviously, is the title of your book. What's the significance of East Clifton Avenue to you that you'd like the viewers to know about?
East Clifton Avenue is a real street in a real town. I spent a lot of time there because my grandparents were there. Clifton is a fascinating city. It still is. It was a fast growing city in 30s, 40s, 50s. It's a neighborhood. As it starts out in the book, Enzo goes out. As my grandfather went out, he'd go out from his garden, whatever, go on the street, and he'd look around and he'd say, you know, after living here for 50 years, a lot of things changed.
Yeah.
Okay. And he remembers the neighbors, every neighbor. I used to know, going up the block from one side to the other, I used to know all the neighbors' names, and I used to know who was there. I used to visit them. It was funny because when we used to go in my grandparents' house, I used to leave my shoes on the outside, and I come out, just my candies filled with my shoes, biscotti, Italian candies.
Nice.
It was a neighborhood. Everybody knew each other. Nobody was afraid of each other. Everybody was in the same boat. Nobody had to brag. That didn't happen until kids started getting older, and then families were they're more judgmental, more materialistic, and I'm hoping we can come back to that.
I used to love it. It's not materialistic at all, but it was a big event in the neighborhood. And I grew up in a similar neighborhood to you. I grew up in New Rochelle on the south end of town, which was like a working class neighborhood. When somebody got a car on the block, everybody would come out to take a look at the car. And I remember one of our neighbors was a deputy sheriff, and he got a Buick Skylark from like 1968. And what a thrill it was to everybody.
Well, you know what, too? It is, and I put it in, I don't remember which book, but it's the good and the bad, because we got a new, I never forgot, we got a 59 Ford station wagon, white with red interior, and that was a big deal. Okay,
Yeah.
you got the car. You're right, absolutely right. But one of the neighbors stopped talking to us. And I said to my parents, I wrote in the book, I go, I don't get it. What happened? I just, blah, blah, blah. And they would not talk about it, but I knew something was wrong. They had that, that kind of resentment, whatever. And I hate to see that. I hate to see
Yeah.
that. It's not a healthy thing. And that a lot has to do with, I taught self-esteem and the importance of understanding self-esteem and worrying about yourself and not comparing. Like they have the term special. I don't think anybody's special. Everybody's unique.
Right.
Because to be special, you got to compare yourself to someone else who is not as special.
Exactly.
And that goes back to what I told my children. I said, one of the things I used to say to them is, as early as I can understand it, I don't know if this is an Italian thing, but I said, you got one piece of candy in that candy dish. Enjoy watching someone else have that piece of candy than having that piece of candy yourself. And even to this day, I'll eat last.
Yeah.
If we have family over, I eat last. Why? My grandfather ate last. My mother ate last.
Yeah.
And they're bugging me. Sit down and eat. I said, I'm enjoying it. I tasted it. I want to see everybody eat first. That's the way I was brought up. I don't know if that's the Italian way. I'm sure other nationalities have it the same way. Food is an expression of love. Just the fact of making it, that, Logan.
Yeah.
And I want to see everybody experience that. And that's my joy.
As Mama Leone used to say, we'll feed you like there's no tomorrow, right?
Oh my God. Good memory. Mommy Leone, right? I think it was in the 50s. I used to work near there. Absolutely. Mama Leone's.
Oh, right. Did you go to Mama Leone's as a kid?
Yes.
Amazing, right?
Absolutely amazing. There's another place, not to change the subject, but there's another place in Little Italy called Lamella.
Oh, yeah.
Phenomenal family food style, family served family style food, whatever. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I still go to those neighborhood Italian restaurants, whether it's in the Bronx, we'll go over to Arthur Avenue. We'll go to Patsy's or something.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, your book really is a wonderful celebration of family, of Italian culture, of closeness, of an era that unfortunately is gone. I mean, people get a new car every 2 or 3 years. We're talking about the seminal event of somebody getting a car on the block, or our very first car. We didn't have a car as a kid. We took the bus.
Right. Absolutely. We took the bus to Passaic to go shopping, my mother and I. Geez, I forgot I was going to say one of the things, but no, I'm sorry. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No. So it's like I said, it's a great exploration. And I think every family from every culture needs to read this book, because it'll help you start putting the pieces of your own puzzle together. Jerry Springer one time told me, and it was a saying that stuck with me, everybody's puzzle pieces together differently. And that's right. Very, very true in some ways, but in some ways, that big picture is the same for all of us, where it's love, connection, the immigrant experience of coming to America, facing prejudice and discrimination, having no money. I remember my folks sitting at the kitchen table, and my dad was a worker for New York City and wondering how they were going to pay the bills. I think he made $40 a week in the 1960s.
That's right.
So the struggles that people had to go through were incredible. You did the whole DNA thing with your family as well, correct?
Yes, I did. I did the DNA thing, and which I thought was fascinating, because one of the things that my grandfather always said is there is Spanish in our blood. He said there's Spanish in our blood, but again, I don't know if he traced it, whatever. So when it came back, 78% Italian. But like you have the 3% Iberian, which is, Spain and Portugal. And then you have my father's side. My father was, again, Reggie Calabria, but a lot of Greek. So, and then sub-Saharan and, different nationalities from different parts of Europe that kind of sneak in there. Yeah. So it's interesting.
It is interesting. It's also interesting to see how long they lived in the regions. I remember when I did my family's DNA, they lived in the Lombardy region of Italy for hundreds and hundreds of years. They didn't move.
No, right. Where could they go? Where could they possibly go?
Amazing.
And, I know.
Tell me about book 2. where you pick up
Okay,
from
book
1966.
two. Here's the advertisement. This is book two. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see it. Yep.
La prossima generazione. It's the next generation. And that picture, if you can see it, that's my
Yep.
mother's wedding picture. That's her
Wonderful.
reception. So again, it's the next generation. Now, book two, again, picks up where book one leaves off, but about 2/3 of it happens to take place in the funeral home where my grandfather is with Enzo Bonaforte is laid out. Because as you know, death brings out the best, brings out the worst. The dynamics of the family change. Now my grandfather was the spokesperson for his family. He was the head. My grandmother was the neck. But then my grandmother realized I got to be the neck and I got to be the head. So there's a whole changing. There's something else in there that's introduced in book one that's going to be more in book two is my grandparents had a gold crucifix under a glass dome. Okay. It came from Sicily. So there's going to be a lot of, and when I was growing up, there was a lot of talk about that and a lot of secretive things about it, which I never knew, which I don't think I'll ever know. I have it. I still have it. But it's going to play a big part in book two. It's going to involve the Vatican. I've been to Italy 25 times. Never been to Sicily, which I'm going. I'll be going next year. So there are a lot of things that I saw there that I want to bring in familiarity. I'm hoping that there'll be interest in the nostalgia of the 20s, 30s, and 50s and 60s here and from Italy. That'll also draw a viewer's interest because I'm hoping, and we're pitching it to different producers. I like to see it made into a series. I like to see it made to Netflix. I watch a lot of British TV, Coronation Street, East End, and the interest goes on and people relate to it. And I want it to be a positive thing that they can relate to and go back to their families and say, hey, I read this and whatever. But one thing you said about the book, again, that's of interest is in going back is the dilemma when a parent has to be put in a nursing home. People that read it and wrote to me said it was so difficult putting my mother in a nursing home. And I read your mother's experience, which is true. And it made me feel a little better. And it made me feel, but again, it was heartfelt. And that's, what do you do? I have insurance for that, but a lot of people, they don't. What do you do when one parent dies? And it's a dilemma and it's heartbreaking. My mother went almost every day to see my grandmother. I was very angry about it. And Dean is very angry about a book that, why can't your other siblings who can afford to it, you're the seventh of the 8 children. Right. And why can't they do more?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a common problem, a common theme, particularly now that people are living to be, well into their 80s or 90s, 100 and beyond. And so it's an interesting aspect that you explore there. Also, in your second book, there were a lot of societal changes. Women's rights came to the forefront. You had the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, of Martin Luther King. Do you address any of those societal issues in your book?
Yes, I do, because in the funeral home, there is a concern because a soldier is going to be brought in for a private funeral. And it's the first time we talk about Vietnam. They didn't even know how to pronounce the word. And I'm bringing that in. And I'm bringing book 3 will have a lot of that. We'll have a lot of that. Book 3, I'm anticipating will probably end. It'll go right up from the 60s, early 70s, right up to present day, and I will bring everybody up to speed. What happened to them? What's going on? But I bring in current events of that time, and the viewer can look at it because a lot of times I talk to my students about Vietnam. What was that? There's a loss of history and a loss of appreciation. Maybe this will bring it to the forefront and the sacrifices that had to be made, whether you agree or disagree or agree, will be discussed again.
Yeah. Oh, it was such a important time in our lives. I was born in 62. And the Vietnam War was was there. And I remember my whole youth, my mother being afraid I'd be drafted someday. Mm-hmm. And we remember watching on TV the scroll of the names of the people who had died. You were looking to see if anybody you knew from your block. I mean, right. Everybody you knew somebody who was in
right.
The war.
I had a cousin who was her fiance died early in the war. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because everybody had skin in the game. It's different today. I don't know anybody who's in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it might be around the globe anymore because it's a volunteer army. But when they were taking from every sector of society, we all felt the pain. And in some ways, that was good.
Yes, yes. And also some people who were drafted were up for it. Some were not up for it. They just couldn't do it physically, but they were forced. War, like war is a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing. I don't know a period where we didn't have a war. And when you're trying to reflect on it and you show the horrors of it, I tell my students, I kind of get the guys kind of get a little ticked off, and I go, you know what? Women are here, men are here. And they go, what are you talking about? Women are here, men are here. A couple of reasons. Maybe if women ruled the world, we wouldn't have war. And what can a woman do that a man can't do that should be respected? They give birth.
Yeah.
You had a mother.
Right.
You had a mother. You got to look at it differently and learn how to treat women. Learn how to treat a girlfriend or a mother or a sister.
Exactly.
And
the hand that rocks the cradle definitely rules the world for sure.
Right. That's right. And I appreciate strong women. I worked for strong women when I was a producer, and they appreciated the fact that I wasn't threatened by them. So it was a great two-way street. I got what I want. They got what they wanted, and the overall picture was successful.
Wonderful, wonderful. How has the writing experience been like for you? I know you're academic as well as a TV producer, but getting into this type of writing, something that's lengthy, what was that like for you?
Well, you know what, Logan, and you may do the same thing in your craft. I'm always writing in my head. I'm always coming up with a story. I gave some of the characters are based on real characters, but some of them had to be a creation of 2 or 3 real people to have the story make sense. Okay. So I brought these people to life. I through their dialogue. I love the dialogue. I want people to understand who they are. And it's a writing process, could be at any time. I have notes all over the place. I make notes. I don't want to forget something, especially get older. I will change book 2 is done, but I like to revise. I like to go back to one of the characters that have in there. I go, maybe he shouldn't have reacted that way. And I'll sit down and I'll read through it and I'll revise it and revise it. But I'm constantly writing in my head. Funny thing is, a couple of times I thought I wrote something down. I'm looking through my whole computer. It was in my head. I never wrote it down. I developed it in my head, and then I'll go back and write it down. But
I know sometimes I'll go to my computer and I'll find something I wrote and I'll be like, wow, this is really good. I wrote this.
Yeah, right. And you're in a fascinating industry because you're reading other things people wrote. You're reciting them.
Right.
It's got to be really interesting because you're also saying, as an actor, you're saying, would that person say that? That doesn't make sense, So to me, that's
your dialogue rang very true. If that means anything to you, I thought it was very realistic, which was great. It kind of brought the story to life because if the conversation is stilted, if it doesn't have that real feel, then you've lost the reader.
I also wanted to bring 3 characters, and I do this because an appreciation for their race or ethnicity. Rabbi Merlino, very kind man. Howard Johnson, a black man, considered a colored man at the time, real survivor, real down-to-earth, wonderful man. I wanted to show how he should be respected for who he is, okay? And then you have Anna Avero, who is a strong woman, head of the nursing home. So I like to bring in characters, not only bring the action, but represent something,
right?
Whether it's the race, ethnicity, and also survivorship. And so the reader says, yes, I can do this. I can relate to her. I can relate to him and show some kind of appreciation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every generation wants more for the next generation. Did you get that feeling from your father and your grandfather and all that?
Absolutely. In my book, Speaking of Evil, I have a list of things he said that I've always told my daughter and my son, I said, we go around once. My father used to say, if you're going to do it big, and my mother, like I told you before, you better learn how to appreciate, always respect, used to, when I was little, always shake somebody's hand and everything, and everything that you pass on, you pass on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if all those good lessons are taught to kids anymore. To stand when a woman walks into the room, to never offer your hand to a woman unless she extends hers first, to give a man a firm handshake. All of the stuff that meant something to us growing up is kind of going to the wayside. And to me, it still means something when I shake a man's hand and it's a firm grip, that kind of thing.
Well, that's what I'm hoping is the whole list of things that my parents had said to me in Speak No Evil. I'm hoping that they're shared. It's funny because I heard from a not childhood friend, but it was a neighbor where we grew up in. It was East Patterson. Now it's Elmwood Park. Mm-hmm. And it was he was about 15, 20 years younger than I was, growing up. And he contacted me, said, I saw the article that was written about you. I read the book. Thank you. I have children that have self-esteem problems. Thank you. Everybody should read it. Everybody should read it. And that's my hope, to be able to share. I didn't do this for the money. I'm retired. Right. I don't need the money. It's wonderful, but it's just something I wanted to share and something that I wanted to have as a legacy for me and for my parents.
Absolutely. And it's a wonderful legacy. It's a wonderful story. It's an epic tale. The name of the book is East Clifton Avenue, a family trilogy. Book 1, From Sicily to America, 1889 to 1966. It is a wonderful story. You will recognize the Buonaforte family. You'll see it within your own family. It'll start you questioning your own family. It'll start you questioning the way you were raised and why we stopped doing the things that we did that were right. Frank, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Well, Logan, it was a real pleasure, and I'll be watching out for you.
Okay, thanks. Looking forward to speaking to you again down the road about your other books as well. Speak No Evil sounds terrific, and I'd love to talk to you about that sometime.
All right. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.